views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey folks, time for the Bronx Buzz, and as you probably know by now, this is BronxNet's program where we get a chance to speak with Bronx reporters about what they're writing about, what they're talking about, what they're thinking about, give you a little insight as to what goes into some of the stuff that you read about in our local papers every day. And this evening, we're thrilled that my good friend David Cruz, the editor of the Norwood News, is with us. Nice to have you back, sir.
Thank you, guys.
You may get the award. You might have been the most frequent guest we've had so far.
Oh, really?
I don't know. We'd have to count.
I'm really flattered.
Well, you should be, because there are a lot of really cool stories on my plate, on my table, on the round table today. Let's start with this, which I thought, I mean, this was really an exclusive as far as I could tell, that there is a compensation fund for victims of sex abuse through the church, the Catholic Church, and that fund expires. You wrote the story about it. I'd like to know what goes into it and what is significant in it.
Well, this was just, we had gotten this straight through a PR person who just told us about it. I thought it had relevance for the Bronx, considering it has the second most Catholic churches throughout the city. And of course, New York Archdiocese, they cover Manhattan, they cover the Bronx, and they cover Staten Island. Bronx and Brooklyn and Queens are not part of the New York City Archdiocese. And so this gentleman has been going around telling community boards to sort of informing them about this fund. The fund it expires July 30th, and it's essentially for you have direct interactions with the Archdiocese in terms of making a claim against the church, and the I guess the arbitrator will go ahead and hear the case out, and then from there they go ahead and give you some kind of compensation that's always undisclosed.
And how much money is in there? Has the money been used? And or do we think there are a number of people who deserve the money but have not claimed it?
A lot of the money is essentially, it's undisclosed. It came through a loan from the Archdiocese. The Archdiocese took out a loan. Unclear how much money it was, but it's not necessarily a guarantee that anyone who comes forward will go ahead and get some kind of a compensation. They'll have the ear of the arbitrator, who will listen to the case, and then based on any kind of evidence they have, that's when they'll go ahead.
Does that supersede or precede a legal process, or really can anybody who believes they've been abused, I wouldn't suggest that anybody does it fraudulently, but anybody who believes they have been abused can just go and request?
Correct. The gentleman that I spoke to, I forgot his name in here, but he's...
I'll give David his own story back.
Well, he essentially said that your best bet is to not go in there alone. Your best bet is to get a lawyer.
Well, you've got to have a lawyer, for sure.
Definitely get a lawyer, because these guys can very well turn on you.
Sure. Why would it expire? Why not just have a fund, and then over time you can extract from that
the
fund?
Archdiocese did not explain why. I'm not really sure why. I'm wondering if it has anything to do with their fiscal year, if it's up on July 30th, or or they have to sort of give the money back after a certain point.
Well, it also could be, and I'm just speculating. If you don't know, I certainly don't know, but I'm just speculating that it can't go on forever. I mean, at some point you say, this is when we will make those funds available, because otherwise you could have somebody in 10 years show up. Certainly if they've been abused, that's one thing. But I'm just guessing.
This has gone on for a couple months. This essentially is the second phase of this, I guess, this program. The first phase was for folks who've already gone to the Archdiocese and have already made a claim against the church. The phase 2, which is the one we're currently in right now, is for those who've never made a claim against the church until now.
Dave, you wrote a story about the Bronx Borough President and the Brooklyn Borough President, who came out very strongly and got a lot of publicity, as a matter of fact, about the need for gifted and talented schools in the Bronx. You tied it somewhat into the headline is ahead of mayoral control of schools' fate. Now, just for viewers, we're recording this Tuesday. It won't air till Thursday. As I understand, the governor has called the legislature back on Wednesday so that they can discuss the fate of mayoral control. So before we get into gifted and talented, let's just break into a little dialogue about mayoral control. Is it conceivable that this time around, they won't come to an agreement and then we'll be back to the old system of the Board of Education?
Not one legislator wants, especially within the city of New York, not one borough president, including the Bronx borough president, wants to see the old system go back, because they said they saw that it was extremely chaotic. What's really holding up this idea of keeping mayoral control in the hands of the city, or at least the mayor, is the negotiations between the Republicans in the Senate and the Assembly, which is purely mostly Democratic. And
right.
They essentially want to add these concessions, these stipulations to mayoral control, which the Assembly does not want.
Yeah, they didn't want a package deal, so to speak. You know, I had Assemblyman Sepulveda on Bronx Talk this week, and I asked him directly, is there nobody in the state legislature of any authority who is willing to stand up and say, you know what, even if we have our own agenda, and for the Republicans in the Senate, it's about charter schools, for the Democrats, it's directly about mayoral control, is there nobody willing to stand up and say, you know what, let's just put the kids first. Let's come up with a deal. Let's fix the school system.
Wow.
It shocks me that the kids and the 1 million kids and families in our public school system are being used like that.
True, but mayoral control only comes out every 5 years or so. So this is
well,
their
it depends
goal.
how long they extend
Right.
it
Well,
for,
right. In this case, they did 5 years.
Well, they did 1 year, right?
Well, no, they're right. They did 1 year. They're looking to do another year, but there was essentially 4 years. How often do you have the opportunity to go ahead and demand these asks with respect to mayoral control, with respect to school-related issues? So it's sort of like these legislators' opportunity to seize the moment and try and cram in whatever concessions they have.
And part of it is being couched as some dissatisfaction or political anger against the mayor, Bill de Blasio. But I wish I could remind the elected officials, this is a conceptual thing that takes us farther than just the dialogue about this particular mayor. You don't like this mayor, well, that's one thing, but it's a conceptual thing, not a specific thing. We're giving Mayor de Blasio what he wants. We're deciding this is the best way to manage the schools.
Well, I'm wondering if whether or not the relationship between Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. and Governor Andrew Cuomo will sort of compel Cuomo to sort of side with de Blasio.
Wow, how interesting! I would not have drawn that
because
association.
The thing is, Diaz does not want he wants mayoral control.
Right.
He does
but
not
he's also a supporter of charter schools.
Correct. He
wants them both. But, you know, the other thing that I heard when we discussed it last night briefly with the Assemblyman is that Carl Hastie, you may not even be aware of this, has now tied the notion of collecting sales tax, which is a law that has to be extended, has tied it on his side to because that affects a lot of the upstate cities, and said, all right, if you're not going to go for mayoral control, then we're not going to vote and approve the collection of sales tax, which really affects the northernmost counties in the state. Seems to me, rather than pull back and take politics further out of it,
it's sort of politics at its best right now.
Yeah, right. It's like, all right, you don't like it, we're
Right.
going to come up with this.
There's definitely a lot of give and take going on right now.
By the time this airs, there may be a solution to this. We have to be certainly honest with our viewers. So this idea of gifted and talented schools, it's been a dialogue that we've done for a long time in the Bronx. What do you make of what Eric Adams of Brooklyn did and Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz did?
Well, the two definitely wanted to put the issue to the forefront, mainly because in the Bronx, I only speak on the Bronx, there's really not that many gifted and talented programs in the borough. And so here you have a situation where you have gifted and talented students, really high achieving students looking to go into these programs, but the issue is that a lot of them are outside of the borough. And so priority, as far as the DOE is concerned, priority does not go to kids who live outside the borough. They go within the district that they live in. And so Bronx students basically take a back seat.
Right. And what was the
remote.
proposed fix?
Well, they had 9 proposals, and essentially, among the 9, they essentially wanted more programs in the Bronx and Brooklyn, because as it stands right now, there's really not that many.
And I would just interject. I'm going to ask you a real quick question because we don't have a lot of time, but I would just interject that this is the precursor to why students of color don't necessarily do well on the specialized high schools test,
right,
because they haven't had the same prep opportunities. And I'm not talking about prep courses, I'm talking about educational opportunities. Real quick, this is the current edition of the Norwood News. You have a story in there about Fordham stores avoiding fines by agencies that give them out. So tell me a little bit about what they're doing on Fordham Road.
I had
about 45 seconds.
Sure. I had one of my reporters, Reggie Francois. She went out to Fordham, where the Department of Consumer Affairs and Department of Sanitation were going store to store along the Fordham Road Business Improvement District, sort of just giving them warnings of what could happen if they would actually give you a ticket and why they would give you a ticket.
So it was really an educational
exactly.
thing for the businesses to figure out how to avoid.
It's called Business Education Day.
All right, listen, the Norwood News. Pick it up, love it, read it. Go to norwoodnews.org. And much respect to David Cruz, the editor, because you're just running a tremendous operation. And I know with limited resources, but you're really making it happen. And we love that you come here. We'll be back. More of the Bronx Buzz right after this.
Sure, I look cute now, but when my owner lost his job, it was rough. I was living on the street, and one night, me and this Cocker Spaniel got into it so bad, I wound up looking like an ice cream cone. I cried a little bit, but thankfully I got rescued, so I'm running, I'm jumping, all back to my old self, and I'm ready to give unconditional love, even if you put a lampshade on my head.
It's not always easy being a dad.
Do you have panda asthma too? Does that run in the family?
This is the home of the most priceless kung fu artifacts.
But when you make an effort,
Dad, we're not supposed to touch anything.
Oh, sorry. Go long, son!
it's always worth it.
Whoa, master!
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life. Take time to be a dad today.
I am gonna get you. I'm gonna get you.
Call 877-4DAD-411 or visit fatherhood.gov to learn more.
Oh my God, go! Oh, Shane, look out!
Hamilton was adopted from a rescue in 2008. He really likes to be around people. And as soon as I start to make my breakfast, Hamilton is right there. I get out my mat and I'm doing a downward dog and he's underneath. He's quite the pug about town. He gets invited to a lot of parties. He knows he's a pretty big deal. I mean, look at this little face. How could you not love him?
Hey, back with you on the Bronx Buzz, and our next guest is on Skype, and she's calling all the way from Inwood in Manhattan. So let's say hello to our buddy Carolina Pichardo from DNA Info. Nice to have you with us, Carolina.
Hi, thank you guys for having me again. Very happy to be here.
Just real quick, so people in the Bronx, because technically you are not a Bronx reporter, tell me about what you cover and what your specialty is for DNA Info.
So my beat is Washington Heights and Inwood, which although not the Bronx, we're neighbors pretty much.
Yeah.
So yeah, I cover pretty much everything that happens in the community, any issues that happen within Washington Heights and Inwood.
And one of the things that I like, frankly, from sitting in this seat and talking to people like you is even though and we're very territorial in the Bronx, and we draw the line, although of course a lot of people would talk about Marble Hill in a controversial way, but there's always things that we can relate to that are going on in other districts. And I find that if we learn a little bit more about it, we can do better in the Bronx as well. So among the stories that you have written is talking about Inwood rezoning meeting, and it was very crowded. Obviously, rezoning is a major issue here in the Bronx. What do people in the neighborhoods think about it? And maybe we should even step back. What is the city proposing?
Well, this has been a project that has been in the works since 2015. It started late in 2015 with workshops, community workshops, organized by the city's EDC agency, the council member. They were organizing along also with the community board.
Excuse me, is that Inez Dickens or Adonis Rodriguez?
Adonis Rodriguez,
okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify for people in the Bronx. Go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to think everyone knows.
That's okay. Well, I'm like that with the Bronx. I think everybody knows what we're doing in the Bronx.
So it's actually been going on to 2 years now. It paused briefly last year. The city said they needed to take a step back, and they did for a few months, and they reintroduced it actually about 2 months ago. So since then, there's been a lot of opposition from the community just because it sort of feels like it's being sort of shoveled in.
Top down. All right, so now let's just get into that because, again, this is something certainly people in the Jerome Avenue area know and Southern Boulevard. I mean, this has been talked about. And the process sounds very similar. So they go and they do hearings and they bring people in and people have their say. And yet, then when they come back, there's still people saying, well, wait a minute, this is still not the plan we want. What what is the city proposing, and what are the issues that people are saying, wait a minute, we don't really like that?
Well, originally it was a very big study plan, sort of going from Dyckman Street in Inwood all the way to the tip of Manhattan, which is actually almost reaching into Marble Hill. And they sort of scaled back and focused on an area on 10th Avenue, which is on the eastern part of the island, and said that they were going to focus on that area, rezoning that area specifically around 10th Avenue, close to that bridge that goes onto into Fordham Road.
The 207th Street Bridge, to be clear.
7th Street, yes. And so that was the original plan. They then came back a few months ago and said that they were going to expand the rezoning efforts and sort of go into the western part of west of Broadway. So it's now going from most of Dyckman Street, all the way of Dyckman Street, into the northern part of the island, from pretty much taking up the entire.
Right, and following along, and we'll use the Jerome Avenue study as a kind of a template for it. This sounds exactly like the same kind of thing, that there would be many people concerned about the industries that are there, people who have had, let's say, auto body businesses and all those kinds of businesses for many years, and what happens to them, number one. Number two, if you put more housing in, you put more people in, and I see you shaking your head. It's the same story. If you put more people in, are you going to improve the infrastructure for transportation? Are you going to improve the infrastructure for schools? And so those questions, I'm guessing, are not being answered to the satisfaction of the people in the neighborhood.
You nailed it. You pretty much.
So why do I have you here? I could do that. But really, this is what's going on. And then the people feel like even though we've spoken up, we're not getting the response. So where is this process at? And is it just going along? And do elected officials, for example, Councilmember Rodriguez, is he for it, or is there going to be some pushback? And the reason that I'm asking, I'm just curious if people in the Bronx would feel that they're being treated the same way or different from what people in, let's say, Upper Manhattan are being treated.
I mean, the city right now says they're still having discussions. There isn't yet a concrete plan as to what are the next steps. There was a recent meeting, which is the article I sent out, which it was pretty much over 200 people.
Yeah, standing room only is the way you characterize it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was, I actually almost didn't make it in myself because it was so packed initially, they wouldn't let anyone else in. So it was very, I mean, there is a strong opposition just in terms of what the city, the residents themselves are just saying, you're not hearing us, this is not what we want. We want to include all of Inwood. I mean, there's just a lot of elements to this one project.
Right. And you know, I don't know. I think I'm going to move on because we don't obviously have an answer. But it's the same question of, can you do these things? Can you add more housing? Can you rezone an area and not have people hurt and have the people who have invested in the community benefit from that? I'm not even going to ask you that question. I believe it can be done. So far, the feedback from residents is that it's a difficult thing to do.
I mean, yeah, it's difficult also because, I mean, we're noticing also the train issues. So that's a big concern for a lot of people up here. I mean, how are you going to fit all these people up here when we can barely get them into the train on time?
So we're talking about the #1 train over there, and over here, which of course is, we borrow the #1 train for the northern part of the ride. And it's the same thing for people on Jerome Avenue with the #4 train. All right, speaking of the trains, what a perfect segue you did. For folks who don't know, we're shooting the show Tuesday. It's actually going to air Thursday. So today there was a derailment on the A train. And it's an ugly story because apparently, and of what we know so far, there was garbage on the tracks, et cetera, et cetera. And people who ride the subways, especially those who ride every day, are saying, enough, we've had enough. You have written at least a couple of stories about the subways, about the elevators at 168th Street. Talk a little bit about what you have discovered along the way.
I mean, primarily with the elevators, it's been an issue for many years actually, but it's been getting worse. Since earlier this year, it's actually been causing just delays after delays for many residents. I get tweets from people daily regarding the elevators and the escalators. Really? Just concerns. They're like, oh, the elevator's off again, or the escalators are off again. And it's many residents are just pretty much fed up. So with this derailment, I think it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg.
I was going to say, add it to the list. You know, as somebody who's lived in the Bronx and lived in the city all my life, and have ridden the 1 to the A or the A to the 1 any number of times, I'm scared to go in those elevators. And frankly, they're disgusting. They still smell. I mean, after all these years, we couldn't put in a decent elevator car that rides up and down. I got to tell you, I can't believe it. That's my editorial comment. I can't believe it.
Well, I mean, when it comes to the 1 train, the 168th train station and the 181st train station, the only way for you to access the actual subways is through elevators. So, I mean, that alone is pretty frightening for a lot of people up here.
And goodness gracious, you know, the thought of being stuck in there, and it's always hot. You can be there in the middle of winter. It's even worse because you're wearing your coat and it's hot. Just maybe stepping outside the local reporter hat, what do you think the answer is? Is this simply a money thing? I mean, Joe Lota now has been named the new chairman of the MTA. Do you think, I mean, his expertise and experience brings something that will help? I mean, where are we at here, and how are we going to solve this thing?
Oh man, that's
Please, Carolina, solve us the problem of the MTA.
I mean, I think there's a lot to be said about having Joe back on board, Joe Lota back on board. You know, it kind of speaks to where we at this point. It feels like it's reached a peak, like that sort of tipping point where it's either we do something now or never, and bringing him in is definitely gonna, I think, add in.
At least one kind of experienced voice. Last thing I want to say real quick, you wrote a story about empty storefronts plaguing uptown. We have empty storefronts as well. Real quick, why are they empty, and we got about a minute. Why are they empty, and what is it going to take to get them filled?
Well, a lot of the reasons why they're empty is rents. That's a lot, one of the biggest.
Commercial rents.
Commercial rents, yes. And people not, business owners not being able to afford it. One of the expert I spoke to pretty much said that landlords, because of the incentives that a lot of them get for having them empty, they get tax breaks and things of that nature. There isn't that urgency to fill up these spaces, so they hold out for those businesses that can pay them.
Yeah, I got to cut you off because we're almost out of time, but that's a really key point that you made, is that, you know what, we could probably do better. We get a bigger business, we get a franchise business in here, and mom and pop are really having a hard time. Listen, Carolina Pichardo from DNA Info, folks, I urge you to read DNA Info. I urge you to read Carolina's work, and thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Yes, thank you guys. Thank
Great.
you so much.
Folks,
Bye.
that will conclude the Bronx Buzz for tonight. And it's been a great show. Thanks to David. Thanks to Carolina. And guess what? We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
We are there, day one, with baby names and a gift that lasts a lifetime. We are there as you grow, protecting you and those you love. We are there when you get your first job, helping you to save for the future. We are there when you marry your sweetheart to help secure your new life together. We are there if the unexpected happens, to help you see life from a new perspective. We are there when you start your next chapter to make sure you get off to a great start. And we are there when you lose your soulmate to help make sure you will be all right. We are with you through life's journey. Social Security, securing today and tomorrow. Get to know us and see what you can do online at socialsecurity.gov.
Taxpayer expense.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.